My name is Amina El Ahmed, and my name used to be Llanchie Stevenson, and I was one of the principal ballerinas, African-American ballerinas, during the 1968 to 70 in the United States. I came here when I was 6, and when I was a little girl, my parents took me to the Radio City Music Hall, and I saw the dancers, the ballet dancers on stage, and they looked so nice and everything, and I said to my parents, you know, I like that, I want to do that. So my mother started taking me to ballet school, ballet lessons. I started taking ballet lessons, and as soon as I started taking ballet lessons, the director of the school said, she's very exceptionally talented. She's very, very good. So you should pursue it. And I was given a scholarship for my classes, so my parents didn't have to pay for my classes. So this went on, and when I got to high school, to go to high school, I didn't want to go to the local high school where everybody else was going, so I auditioned for the High School of Performing Arts. I got accepted to the High School of Performing Arts in the ballet department, and this was a big thing in my ballet school because nobody had been accepted from that ballet school to High School of Performing Arts and in the ballet department. So I stayed in the ballet department for my freshman year, and in my sophomore year, all of a sudden one day they changed me to the modern department. And the reason they explained to me was because I was African American, they felt that I would be able to get better jobs, or I would be able to get jobs as a dancer more easily if I went into the modern dance instead of the ballet. I was very upset, and I went home crying, and then I told my parents, and the very next day my father went up to the dance department and he talked to the dance director, and that very day I was switched back into the ballet department, and I stayed in the ballet department, and I graduated as a ballet major from the High School of Performing Arts. After the High School of Performing Arts, my parents wanted me to go to Juilliard, which is a college. They wanted me to go to college, and I said, no, I want to dance professionally because as a dancer, your career is very short, and I wanted to continue I wanted to dance professionally. So I started auditioning for different ballet companies and whatever audition that I could find out. And just for my curiosity, I decided, well, let me I heard that Alvin Ailey was teaching classes. So I said, well, let me just go and see what it's like, what his classes are like. It was modern dance, but I said, oh, well, let me try. So I went to a class, and before the class ended, Alvin Ailey said, I want you for my company. So I got my first job at 17, didn't audition or anything. He said, being that I had the talent, I started working professionally with Alvin Ailey Dance Company, and I danced with Alvin Ailey. Some people think that that's important, that I actually danced with Alvin Ailey. Okay, as I was working with Alvin Ailey, the Alvin Ailey Dance Company was traveling all over the United States, and Alvin Ailey kept telling me, you're so talented in the ballet. You should be really trying to really get into the ballet world and become, the first African-American ballerina. You should be constantly trying. So every time I would never get a break, they would make me put on my pointe shoes and practice my fortes and make sure that, that I kept up my ballet skills and ballet talent. So one day they said, we feel like, why don't you go and audition for the Radio City Music Hall? We feel that you have the talent to be the first African-American ballerina at the Radio City Music Hall. So I went, and I took the audition, and the director at that time, Mark Platt, he said to me, practice your fortes and come back in 2 weeks. So I said, okay. So I went, and they said they made me practice, no water break or anything. Practice pointe, pointe after, and pointe is the hardest step in ballet. And if you can do that, then. So then in 2 weeks I went back, and he said, yes, let's take her. So then I started working in the ballet court, in the corps de ballet of the Radio City Music Hall. This is a big thing. It was a big thing in my church. At that time I was a devout Christian, and I was going to church and everything. It was a big thing in my church, big thing in my ballet school. This is the first time that they had someone being very, very successful from the ballet school. And I worked at Radio City Music Hall. They gave me a few special parts at Radio City Music Hall. I stayed there for 2 years, and at the same time, I was influenced by other ballet dancers coming and doing special performances at the Radio City Music Hall. And I said, I really want to be a ballerina. And I really want to be in a ballet company and dance as a professional ballerina. That's where what I really want to do. So I auditioned to the best school in the country at that time, School of American Ballet, was run by George Balanchine, and the New York City Ballet that was run by George Balanchine. George Balanchine is considered to be one of the greatest choreographers of all times. There hasn't come anybody after him so far as a successful choreographer. So he is known to be the best of choreographers in history so far. So I went to School of American Ballet, and I auditioned for the School of American Ballet, and George Balanchine, gave me a scholarship. This is a very important thing because not very many dancers get that opportunity, period, and less African American dancers to get that opportunity. Okay, so I stayed there for 2 years, and nothing happened. I was hoping to be accepted into the New York City Ballet. That was my dream, to be a member of the New York City Ballet. And I watched all the dancers, and some of the ballerinas would give me their pointe shoes when when I needed. So I was always getting pointe shoes. I didn't have to pay for pointe shoes or classes or anything. So. Finally, nothing happened. I didn't get into the company. I saw other of my classmates getting into the company, and so I asked the director of the school to ask Mr. Balanchine what was his plan for me. And she spoke to him, and then he told her that, well, at the time being that he felt that my color would break the color line, and that he wasn't really ready at that point in the history of New York City Ballet to accept. He had an African American male dancer, Arthur Mitchell, but he wasn't really ready to accept a ballerina at the time. So, in the meantime, the National Ballet of Washington, they were looking for an African American dancer, a female dancer for the company. So I auditioned for Frederick Franklin, and he took me immediately. And so I became the first African American, not the first because there was a young man in the company, but his color was not outstanding, so that you couldn't identify him as an African American. But with me, there was no doubt. So. So I traveled all over the United States with the National Ballet of Washington, and went to over 100 cities in the United States. In some cities, I was not allowed to perform. In Montgomery, Alabama, during 1968, this is during 1968, in Montgomery, Alabama, I was not allowed to go out on stage and perform. They said, you will sit in the audience tonight. Because of the racial conflicts that have been going on with the bus boycott and the various things that was happening in Montgomery, Alabama, and also Spartansburg was not allowed to dance there on stage because of the racial conflicts that were going on in the United States. After the assassination of Martin Luther King and Arthur Mitchell being the he was a principal dancer of in the New York City Ballet. He decided to start a ballet company where only for African Americans, so African Americans could dance ballet. So he started the Dance Theater of Harlem, and he asked me, since I was already working as a professional ballerina, he asked me to join the company and be the first principal ballerina in his company. And I danced with him, Arthur Mitchell, and we toured the United States, and we also went Europe and did many performances in Europe and in the Caribbean, and that went on for a while. And the Dance Theater of Harlem was a revolutionary concept, because prior to the Dance Theater of Harlem, it was thought that African Americans could not dance ballet, that they didn't have the talent, they didn't have the body. It just, even to today, in some companies, the Bolshoi Ballet, you will not see an African American female dancer, and definitely, and in various other countries where, like England and so on, where ballet is kept to, it's kept to classical remembrance, and that's another thing. I mean, they remember and they present the classical ballet exactly the way it was 1700 years ago. Therefore, in many of the ballets, and that's what's happened to me, historically, there were no African Americans in that town at the time or around. They were slaves or so whatever, or they just didn't exist in the town. I had many a problem in that. In many of the ballets, they said to me, well, we don't know where to put you historically, because historically, we can't add you because historically would not be correct. But in fantasy ballets like Nutcracker, fantasy ballets where it's all fiction anyway, you could have an African American snowflake, you can have an African American friend of the prima ballerina. She could be in many ballets I was the friend of the star, because that worked out historically. I could be a friend. So one day in rehearsal, I noticed that my arms were a different color from my legs, because at that time, up to that time, all ballet dancers wore pink tights and pink point shoes. No skin, nothing different, just pink tights and pink. That was a standard thing, and that was the tradition in the ballet world. But I felt that, okay, I looked so disjointed, so I started wearing brown tights over my pink tights. Well, the director of the company, Arthur Mitchell, he liked it so much that he felt that that was the statement that the Dance Theater of Harlem should make. And so then he decided that all dancers had to wear the tights to match the color of their skin. But this went on, and it really started a revolution in the dance world, to the point where they started making ballet tights, skin color of different skin colors, which they hadn't done before. And the dancers also, they would make the dyes to dye the point shoes so they matched the color of the skin. Today, one of the principal ballerinas, the African American principal ballerina in the American Ballet Theater, Mitzi Copeland, her shoes are dyed the same color as her skin, and that all started with Llanchie Stevenson. Then I was not getting the parts in the company that I thought that I should be getting. I was like, it was as if I were the second ballerina, even though I was casted and promoted as the principal ballerina. I would not get the parts that I wanted, and I felt it was because of my weight. So I saw a book that said How to Eat to Live by Elijah Muhammad, and I got the book and I started reading it. And when I started reading it, I started practicing the things that the book said. And I lost the weight, and I gained the parts and that I wanted, and everything was going very successfully. And the book talked about Allah. And I really wanted to know more about this Allah. And so that prompted me to go to the Nation of Islam meetings. I went to the Nation of Islam meetings, and I liked the fact that the men and women were separated. I liked the fact that I liked the teachings because they would talk about Allah, and I liked how that the women were covered and the beautiful pastel colors they wore. And I said, okay, this seems more like my way of life. So I changed from Christianity to Islam. That's how I changed from Christianity to Islam. And during that time, listening to the teachings, they said that women do not perform in front of men, and and they don't dance in front of men, and they definitely don't dance uncovered, and they don't dance uncovered and in front of men both. So then I said, well, okay, I accepted the Islam as my religion, and I wanted to do everything that Allah asked me to do. So then that's when I said, okay, this is the end of my ballet career because I can't dance anymore in public. Because of the competitiveness of the ballet world, you don't establish good relationships and good friendships, and you don't feel like you're part of any particular thing. You don't feel like you're part of a community. In Islam, you always will find Muslims everywhere. You're a part of a community. You can always find people who believe exactly the way you believe. It's just a broader scope, a larger horizon in which that you enter into, as opposed to the dance world. Ballet world is very, very limited, very limited. So that, in the meantime, I met Abdus Salam, and we got married, and we started practicing, we were practicing Islam through the Nation of Islam. Then Elijah Muhammad was the leader of the Nation of Islam at that time. After he passed away, Warathin Muhammad, he became the leader of the Nation of Islam. He said, we are not any different from any other Muslims. We pray, we give zakat, we make salat, we're encouraged to do the Hajj. We're doing everything as every other Muslim does. So there's no need for us to be separated from them. We read the Quran, we memorize the Quran, we try to get the understanding of the Quran. So after that, we decided, well, okay, let us go to other masajids and see, what the understanding. And that's how we got into mainstream, let's say mainstream Islam, or mainstream, going to mainstream masajids, and that's how the difference came about. So after I became a Muslim and I stopped performing, there were times when I would teach ballet to Muslim girls just for the discipline of it, and to encourage them and to make sure that they understood that this is something that we just did for exercise, and that it was that we're not promoting going into the ballet world. It was very good for also gymnastics. I taught gymnastics for a couple of years. I taught gymnastic physical education in schools. I was able to do that because of my ballet training. Alhamdulillah, Allah blessed me with 6 children, and I homeschooled all of them all the way up to college. The discipline is very good, and that is, I think, what I carried on into later life. When I do a lot of the things that I do, being on time for work, participating more in helping, and being more active in my community, I think that comes from the ballet training. If you have a talent and you want to pursue it, you should pursue it with all the effort that Allah has given you, and just make sure that it's within the Islamic guidelines. You should talk to your imam and make sure that whatever you're doing you're doing it for the pleasure of Allah, and you're doing something that Allah wants you to do, and that Allah would not be displeased with.
This Deen TV video was made possible in part by Islamic Relief USA, working together for a better world, by Guidance Residential, the #1 Islamic home financer in the US, and by Recycle Processes Incorporated.